Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Desi Crypto Show. Today, we have Daniel with us from Stakefish. Who is Daniel? What is Stakefish? We'll get into that. But he is a really awesome person. And he's also friends with me, and I have cancelled on him multiple times. So we're doing this after a after multiple cancellations. And after a lot of Twitter messages, outing me. So it's going to be a fun one, and I really respect Daniel and what he does. So I'm really happy to have you here, Daniel.
Right. Yeah. Finally, I'm happy to finally be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. I'll quickly kind of go through everyone has like a crypto origin story. I think mine is kind of strange, but I think very influential in kind of where I ended up at being at Stakefish and also at F2 Pool. But I guess it starts from when I first graduated college in 2011. Yeah, I'm kind of old, but I graduated college 2011. I started working for a law firm as a paralegal because I was interested in like potentially doing stuff in IP because I had a science background, a tech background, and ended up working for a law firm that was at that year and the next year defending like a large bank, HSBC. As everyone knows, there was like the HSBC congressional hearing where HSBC got caught helping these Mexican drug cartels launder money and some of these terrorist financiers. And so our law firm was defending it. I basically had like an existential crisis, figured out that this was like what a lot of the shady stuff that was going on in the traditional financial industry. I thought said it was not for me. And so I essentially rage quit the law firm. And then ended up finding out about Bitcoin towards the end of 2013. Around then, and started mining Bitcoin. Dogecoin came out shortly later that year at the end of 2013. Started mining that because everyone thought we missed the Bitcoin boat. Unfortunately for me, yep. And I eventually ended up in the Philippines as I was doing relief work there, and I built like a small school. Was helping with remittances because of with crypto. And kind of kept diving down the rabbit hole. Eventually, I ended up going to school, studied computer science, did a bunch of bioinformatics research work that ended up doing distributed systems. Then I ended up in grad school and I studied cryptography and focused on some consensus mechanisms as a part of my thesis, or the evolution of consensus mechanisms, and had the awesome opportunity to work with Matt Green, the author of Zero Coin, who one of the co-authors of Zero Coin, which eventually became Zcash. And also, right, he co-authored Zexi, Zero Knowledge Execution, which eventually became Leo, which is another privacy blockchain. But throughout, I've had the opportunity to kind of work as a developer, miner, and a lot of different things. Solidity. I had basically gotten opportunities to work with Hyperledger Fabric in a permission setting when I was at a pharmaceutical company in their strategic analytics and innovation department. Had opportunities to build decentralized exchanges, got a grant from 0x to build some of these hyper-localized exchanges in Asia. And yeah, ended up doing a lot of things in crypto and the ecosystem. Fun story, I guess, with NFT craze is I was there when like at Mr. Tipple's recording bar when all the infamous CryptoKitty auction happened. And now I'm at Stakefish. I'm a protocol specialist at Stakefish, where I primarily do research on protocols and guide the governance there. And then I also lead special projects at F2 Pool, a proof of work mining pool. It's the world's largest Bitcoin mining pool, and I think one of the top Ethereum mining pools, but not necessarily the number one. But that's a whirlwind of. I was all over the place, but
again, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, as people would say, like, you were at HSBC and
sorry, the law firm defending HSBC.
The law, defending
Yeah.
money laundering, and then you got into Bitcoin, which people use for money laundering. I'm just making a joke, but
Hey, that was like the exact reason why I left and wanted to do Bitcoin.
Yeah,
but it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just this is what people perceive, right? Like why people use crypto for. But
That's true.
anyway,
That's true.
that's a
Yeah.
wonderful story. I think you've basically done so much, even like prior to crypto, and then coming into crypto. It probably helps a lot than like just getting into crypto. Anyway, but you told about F2 pool and Stakefish, right? Like these protocols are sorry, these companies,
Service providers.
so
Yeah.
service providers are basically like the base where you start with, right? Because there is proof of work, which is what you're working with, and proof of stake. These are like the fundamentals of cryptocurrencies. What are these? What are proof of work? What is proof of stake?
Yeah, I guess we can start from like the consensus mechanisms, and this is also kind of what I wrote a bit about in my thesis in grad school. But right, we kind of started with this, like the famous Bitcoin white paper, right? That we have. I mean, even before that, right? There's significant problems with like these distributed systems and how certain consensus was established, but in decentralized systems, right? Where we got like with Satoshi is that consensus mechanism, right? Solving difficult computational problems in a predictable set manner for like blocks that can be produced. That is like kind of the core of proof of work with the miners and mining farms, and then now we have mining pools. And then the evolution to proof of stake, which it uses a different non-computationally intensive where it's literally like stake based representation, where like the downside is right, you will not attack a system because you have right considerable stake in it, and you have potential to be punished if you act maliciously, depending on the flavor of proof of stake, of which we have quite many. And I think an important distinction there is especially with these evolution of consensus mechanism in terms of scalability and security. You have like this distinction that, right, with scalability, you have opportunities to kind of separate block production from block finality and other proof of stake blockchains like Polkadot. And also like we have, right, there's so many flavors of it. And right, obviously we have so many flavors of blockchains, and Stakefish does operate and validate and operate nodes, and then accept delegations to validate on proof of stake. So people basically send their tokens in a proof of stake, and then send it to either set up their own validators where they host their own machines, or they send it to validators like Stakefish, which basically accept them and then give you passive returns from basically securing the network. I think, and perhaps we can get into this later, but I think there is a very important a concept that involves delegators and stakers that do participate in the system to be quite active or involved in the process, rather than just having delegated and set it and forget it to validators. Maybe we can talk about that later.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So just to sum it up, just tell me, so what happens at Stakefish? Why should a person like me, who let's say holds a bit of Ethereum, holds a bit of Matic, holds a bit of Polkadot, right, and it's just sitting in my wallet, why should I be using Stakefish?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty interesting question, because that's something that I've been kind of talking a lot about with our team. Let's say, for example, if you're just a pure profit maximalist, ideally you would set up your own validator that's securing the network, and then getting all the rewards from that, right? Or you can kind of stake with a validator service provider like Stakefish, Chorus One, Bison Trails, etc., that offers those services where you don't have to manage your own validator. You don't have to manage like getting slashed or your nodes going down or being punished for something that you don't know actually how to do if you're not very technical. And so validators essentially provide that service where you can act and participate in the security and consensus of a proof of stake system. You're essentially like how miners operate in a proof of work system. And it's just different commission rates, right? If you kind of look at a leaderboard of proof of stake systems that offer like, here's all the validators you can stake with, there's virtually very little to separate each of them, right? And so, right, you can filter the leaderboard and you see, okay, there's Stakefish, Course One, Bison Trails, Chainflow, Chain Layer, etc. And then you see the different commission rates, and those commission rates are basically like the fee that the validator takes, right? If there's a block reward, right, say 90% goes to the delegator and 10% goes to Stakefish to run its operations. And then there's like usually a column that has uptime, right? If this validator has like 99% uptime or 100% uptime, and a variety of other factors, maybe location, et cetera, et cetera. But what often happens is that almost the majority of the larger validators, there's also a column that says like total amount staked, right? And so whether that is an indication of a validator being popular or maybe just got lucky or it was there from the genesis of the chain. So it was able to get foundation delegations from participating in particular incentivized test nets. It allows that validator to be like relatively high, right? And if like a new validator comes in to validate a proof of stake network, they won't necessarily have the type of foundation delegations from Genesis and will not be able to climb the ladder as easily, which is also another concern that the proof of stake systems have. So, right, how do you determine, right? If you basically just filter by commission, right? I want to have the most returns for my stake, then you can filter by that. However, sometimes what ends up happening is like there's kind of like this market commission rate that all validators kind of set, right? Because if your competitor validator is saying like, oh, we're going to charge 9% commission instead of 10, then you're going to be looking and then potentially they're like, it's a free market. Delegators will move from Stakefish to another validator that's offering lower commission. And then it just kind of becomes maybe perhaps a race to the bottom to like a particular set minimum amount that validators don't have, that have to like, we got to set it, right? Because anything less is going to be, that we're not going to be able to operate, right? There's a point to, there's an extent to the competition that it becomes, in certain circumstances, collaboration and cooperation.
Awesome.
So that is not only the reason I think people can choose what is so special about a validator. That is a very limited set. And I think it's even perhaps harmful because it doesn't allow other validators to kind of participate when kind of break into the top 10 or top 16, for example. I think that validators must have additional ways to communicate with their delegators, and form communities where there is much more value proposition of being part of a validator versus another validator based on just pure profit maximalism. And I think that's community building, validator to delegator communications, and all the types of intangibles and even additional tangibles that validators offer their services to provide. I can talk a lot about that, but that I think is a core component of what we need to continue to see in the validator space, especially if we want to have ideal and very good distribution for the type of services that validators have to provide.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Just to add on to what you're saying is basically, why use Stakefish is basically you have these coins. A lot of people I know, they don't do anything with their coins, right? Like they would like to participate and be validators, but they necessarily don't have that big pocket volume that you can run their own node or their expertise. So I do personally recommend people that instead of just holding your coins, you can delegate it on or become a validator, run a validator node via using Stakefish or similar this thing, and you earn a passive income. Depends on what blockchain you're using. So it becomes a method to earn more income on their already purchased coins. So, which is very necessary. And also, I personally am delegating my Matic to, I don't know the name, or I don't want to disclose, but it comes to the same conversation, like you said, right? Like I've never had a conversation with the delegator, right? Like I have no clue
The
if,
validator, yeah.
yeah, sorry, yeah, I'm the delegator. I've never spoken to the validator. I have no clue what they're doing, what their plans are, or like, if they're voting on some kind of, so like I don't even know what they're doing. So I think what you are trying to do is building a community of, like, which is like, in sync with each other. And like, you also want to tell people, like, this is important and this is what we can do, and like, build a nice community around it. Like, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I think there doesn't exist enough of a culture of disclosure that validators do on behalf of their delegators. I think a good analogy that people like to use as validators is that validators are essentially these layer one protocol politicians. But then when there's no communication from a validator to the delegator, like it's lost. Like it's like you voting for someone for parliament and having no idea what they do. And no
Right.
idea what they voted on, or no idea like the history of their votes and like what they're going to potentially vote for in the future. And that is perhaps due to a variety of reasons. Maybe it's just some larger validators or other smaller validators don't have the bandwidth to be able to communicate. Maybe it's also on the other side of the fence where the delegators are not demanding enough for validators to do this. I think there has to be that type of responsibility. And I think that responsibility does exist and needs to exist, particularly because of the entire premise of the security of a proof of stake system. Where a proof of stake system, right, the security is coming from the amount staked. So obviously, to your point, right, there's two things, right? To your point, there's many people who have tokens of a particular proof of stake network, and they don't do anything with them. They just keep it in their wallet and they don't stake it. The more that's staked in a network, the more difficult it is to attack it, and for malicious actors to attack it. And so we need to continue to have people staking so that they can kind of contribute to the staking of the system. And because the more that delegators stake and and the more tokens that are locked up in a system, that is contributing to the security, and also in certain circumstances where there is active governance that different proof of stake networks offer, because in some proof of stake networks, they don't offer the same suite of types of governance and depth of governance that others do. There has to be that type of active governance. And what I mean by that is on the kind of like the in-between layer between the layer one and the application level layer, right? There is kind of like these important protocol changes that can happen both from the technical perspective as well as even some social perspective of like what can be done with certain funds that are available in the proof of stake network that is controlled by governance. And what ends up happening is, like, if people don't care and everyone's just delegating their votes to like a very small number of validators that are controlling the system, it essentially becomes like this very centralized cabal of validators that are not very representative of actual decentralization of the network. There may be many, many different holders, and according to like different metrics, quantifiable metrics that we use, I think the Nakamoto Coefficient is one that we use a lot to measure decentralization of a network. That is kind of drawing from the same concepts of the Gini coefficient, is that of how like wealth distribution is spread, right, into Gini, and then Nakamoto is like how much is staked and how many entities control that stake. Is that the delegators themselves are also independent voters in some proof of stake networks, and they also have to make their voices heard. If there is continued passivity there, because both, if the delegator is lazy, that is also their fault, but it's also maybe perhaps a fault and the burden of responsibility that a validator must have in order for that system that they themselves are benefiting from and securing. They need to encourage that type of communication. So like if validators can communicate to delegators, for example, on the types of things that they have voted on, And so and that is kind of like that responsibility that they share. If, for example, a validator voted one way that is very, very opposed to what a delegator wanted to, that delegator should be made aware. I often kind of think that it's kind of like that concept of like the burden of proof, right? Like delegator might not care, but if he is made known, then he might care, right? And in that case, right, because that intention and existence of opinion exists is available, then there is that kind of resiliency and robustness to what the security of the system should ideally look like. You can't continue to rely on like the altruism of validators to act a certain way if, for example, they are trying to get away with things, right? And this has actually often happened, right? And there's been certain cases where certain validators have done research into like how commission rates of like how to differentiate between different validators. Commission rates is like one of the primary things right now that we have in the absence of like these types of community formations that may provide intangibles of how a certain person chooses a validator, is that, oh, if a validator changes his commission from 10% to like 20%, a bunch of delegators are going to move. Doesn't happen. In the broad, right? There's this concept of like free and efficient markets that's theoretical, saying if something like that happens, delegators will move. But in actuality, it has not happened as much as we imagined. And that's like maybe lack of communication from the validator saying, hey, we're upping our commission to 20% versus a delegator always watching, right? And that it's very interesting because they're nice, maybe mantras that we hold. But they in practice, oftentimes not necessarily holding true. And a perfect example of that is the mantra that we in the cryptocurrency ecosystem love, right? Don't trust, verify. Everything is public on the blockchain, right? These dashboards are supposedly public that validators or other independent third parties host on a network saying this validator is charging 20% now. Did you know that? It's like, oh, if I know that, then I'm going to change. But if they don't communicate that to me, they don't. And so like now the burden is on delegators. And perhaps like it is a case where like the risk and reward ratios are so out insane that people don't have time to check. But then perhaps, right, especially in these like decentralized and open source systems where like responsibility is kind of like, you know, people are just pointing fingers at who's responsible, right? The well-known bystander effect in open source systems. Like perhaps infrastructure providers need to step up, or validator service providers need to step up and take responsibility of that and have more communication. And maybe it's just a matter of time. Maybe I'm just like, you know, complaining a lot in the early days, and it's eventually going to happen. But that is something that we at Stakefish, we're really trying to make an impact moving forward. And that's why we have memes, we have videos, we're building our virtual headquarters on Sandbox. And we're doing a lot of these types of things. We're doing seminar series in different parts of the world, like in Africa and Paraguay, Honduras, and with Blockchain Education Network, et cetera, et cetera. So
very interesting. I'll ask you about that in a bit. I just so see, I understand, right? Like bystander effect. So like in reality, it led to someone not reporting the murder, thinking like, you know, someone else will be doing it.
do it, yeah.
But what's the worst case scenario on crypto? Right? Because you've written about this. I want to ask you, what can go wrong? Like if, like, you know, delegators and validators are not communicating, they're just giving their hands up, right? Like, dude, I just want to earn passive income. What's the worst case scenario?
I think there's maybe two flavors of the worst case scenario. One is obviously like collusion. Like collusion is, right, if a bunch of validators get together and we're, hey, like we're going to start pushing up our commissions to a crazy rate, and let's hope no one notices and we're going to get away with it, right? And then if virtually every validator now has a commission of like 90% or some crazy amount, and then there's no option for people, right? It's like, yeah, you have to go set up your own validator. The burden is on you. That I think is particularly malicious. I think, collusive behavior is only aided by the amount of centralization that we have and the continued centralization that we'll continue to have, right? Market effects and efficient markets in theory should allow people to kind of redistribute their stake accordingly to different validators on the like hundreds or however many validators you have on these proof of stake networks. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen. It's concerning. And I think that's why like I wrote that 3-part series on Ethereum 2 beacon chain transparent decentralization transparency, where, right, there's also semantics and terminology disambiguation that needed to happen. But right, Stakefish is also right included in that. We are one of the top Ethereum 2 validators. Is a significant amount, and it's interesting. Like there have been discussions where sometimes validators we were discussing like, hey, if we get to like a too large amount of stake that is actually dangerous for the system, what do we do? Do we like tell people to stop delegating to us? It's virtually impossible to stop someone from delegating to you, because yes, you can close off your front end, you can like take off all the buttons. But then if someone really wants to delegate to you, they can go in through command line and work with like a client and then delegate to you, right? And it's funny because early in the days, like in 2014 and 2015, when I was mining, there was a similar situation that happened in proof of work where Ghash basically had over 51% of the Bitcoin hash power. And right, they were not able to like, what they had to do is like, they said, stop to miners contributing and mining farms contributing to their hash power to GS, like stop, because we hit over 51%. Yes, right. There's this very interesting concept of like as a business versus as a business operating, you want to have more money and more hash power or more delegation because that's money. That's like your business, right? But then also you struggle with this kind of tug of war of like, in a decentralized system, you do not want to have like a complete monopoly on everything, because you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. If you have too much power, then it's bad for the system, and then the system that you're benefiting from is not going to be as valuable anymore. And so, right, it's interesting.
This crazy game theory happening, right?
Yeah. The cryptonomics, like efficient market, like, so there's a lot of theory and concepts, but then actually in the practical nature of what actually happens is quite different as we've seen, right? We'd like things to happen, but they actually don't. And that's now just like psychology, human nature, right? Influencing like marketing and stuff like that.
Very interesting. I think we're so early that like we need people like you to come up and talk about this. And again, right, like we're like small bunch of people still, even after so long, that there will be so much politics in governance when it comes to these systems. Then people will have to actively participate to keep their favorite network as they want it or improve it in a way. Currently, I don't see a lot of people bothering, but I think you guys are doing your best to like get people in, and that benefits you and the network we are participating in. So that's quite interesting from my perspective. You spoke about doing something in Africa, Honduras, and whatnot. Like, so what are you doing there?
So that is basically some of like the decentralization, strategic geographic decentralization initiatives that we've been part of. They're not necessarily like immediate ROI generating activities for us, but I think it's important, as I mentioned, like in terms of like the robustness of a system, right? There were certain blockchains that had halted earlier this year because of certain geographic centralization and reliance on a very, very particular set of cloud service providers. Mm-hmm. And this kind of gets into the nuances of like how decentralization is measured, right? There's like, as I mentioned, like the Nakamoto Coefficient that Balaji had created that kind of is a quantifiable metric that people can kind of look at, like a simple number between 0 and 1, where 1 is very not decentralized and 0 is very decentralized and equitably distributed. of like how a stake and validators are distributed. However, what ends up happening is that a lot of these validators, that Nakamoto coefficient comes with a very important assumption that the different entities that exist in this are basically independently hosted. Okay. So yeah, like, right, we have this assumption that validators are using different um, uh, independent infrastructure, like let's say their own data center, bare metal, or different cloud service providers. But what ends up happening is that a lot of validators use the same cloud service providers, like AWS, right? So you have like this huge, on the surface, superficial layer, all these validators, right? Great, decentralized, distributed. And then when you kind of go onto the infrastructure level, you start to see, oh, there's AWS, Google Cloud, and then it's kind of funneling into like these sorts of cloud service providers. And then sometimes there's like very specialized cloud service providers that are very good at providing very cost efficient services for particular sets of hardware requirements that certain blockchains that need. And then what happens when a cloud service provider like that goes down? What happens if and the traditional world is, and the Web 2 world is no stranger to this, right? We've had AWS outages where like entire swaths of like our internet is like down and like everyone's complaining. But like, especially with blockchains, right? The assumption is it's decentralized and distributed, so it should never go down. There's always going to be a node that is running and available for people. But right, we get kind of like that sort of centralization risk, and right, we can't stop it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Money rules everything in crypto, right? Like if it's cost efficient, then why would I be paying a certain amount of money here to host it when I can pay a certain amount of money here? And everyone's thinking like that, right? So everyone's going to start using it. And if there's a non-trivial amount of validators that are using the same cloud service provider, that cloud service provider basically presents a centralization risk, right? And so that is kind of what had prompted a lot of us, especially in the validator ecosystem, to kind of investigate. And also many foundations of these proof of stake networks themselves have been kind of going hand in hand with us, and we've been supporting them. At least Stakefish has, like, right, figure out how to decentralize and distribute, not just by entity, but also geography. And by geography, you also have cloud service provider decentralization as well. And so, right, for example, on the Tezos network, right, there's a bunch of like 7 countries in West Africa that came together. They were interested in becoming Tezos bakers. That's what we call them, to do validation. And we did a seminar series. So we like myself, I presented on governance and what that looks like, and ecosystem involvement. And then our JK, our strategy lead, presented the business aspects. And then we had our infrastructure leads and infrastructure members kind of answer questions and talk about like certain troubleshooting tips and best practices for how to operate these. And right, that is like our way of being able to ensure that we don't necessarily have to go out and build our own entity out in West Africa, or even South Africa, but right, allow them to kind of build up and have more robustness in the system. And the same goes for other countries and other continents. Right, we need to keep thinking about the future, and then there's certain things that happened in the past that we definitely don't want to happen again. So that's a responsibility, I think, that validators need to have and take the initiative for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you also mentioned something about Metaverse, and Stakefish is doing a lot of things using the Metaverse. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's part of our, I guess, what we're calling internally like our delegator communications perspective, and kind of like tribe setting up or tribe starting, where, right, as I mentioned, right, the way that kind of validators are kind of told apart is perhaps maybe by brand, like by branding, the type of people that represent them, how active they are. But when you get down to it, like when you come and going to choose off a list, like you only see like very limited number of metrics of how to choose a validator. Perhaps there should be more diversity in how validators are chosen, perhaps by region. Let's say, for example, there's a validator like Chainlayer in the Netherlands. they can be a very important part of the cryptocurrency community in the Netherlands, right? They natively are operating infrastructure. They have a very good understanding of the whole stack. And right, if there's an opportunity for Netherlands-based delegators to delegate to chain layer, wonderful, right? And right, communication, time zone stuff. Perhaps it's like that, right? That's like what it was like, kind of the feeling that I was getting when I was mining and part of mining, cloud mining stuff back in the early days, like 2013, 2014, where like, we felt proud to be part of a collective and contributing to the security of the network and Bitcoin. And I think like that can exist. And so, right, if you are also able to foster a sense of community in your as a validator, then people who are delegating to you are more apt to pay attention, right? They're like, oh, cool, I'm part of Stakefish. I like what Stakefish is doing. I want to pay more attention. I'm going to read the stuff that they put out. If Stakefish is now putting out like governance proposals, or like, this is what we voted on, this is why we voted on them, this is how we voted on them, right? And then, right, we just keep pushing that out and no one cares because they don't feel community. No one's going to read it, and that intention is lost. But if we continue putting that out, because we think it's important that people are educated and knowledgeable about what is going on at the validator level, especially when it comes to security and governance, and there's a community, right, they'll pay attention. And that's why we start, right? We had Medium posts that oftentimes, right, who reads like 7 to 15 minute long Medium posts on like the state of the POS networks, right? When there's so much attention drawn elsewhere, everywhere, right? And so we're like thinking, okay, we need to kind of meet the people where they are, right? So Metaverse is nothing. Like, some would argue that like Ethereum itself is a metaverse, or a blockchain layer one itself is a metaverse, or crypto Twitter is a metaverse, or like however we're LARPing. But right, if there are people going to be natively just kind of enjoying their time somewhere, and right, it's a metaverse, then right, that's why we started building our headquarters on Sandbox, right? Sandbox is a fantastic metaverse that has a lot of very native support and alignment. And we've been able to link up with a fantastic development studio called Polygon Mind, one of the two main development studios that works with Sandbox. Started building a virtual headquarters that has like both game experiences that's fun, and also social experiences that enable delegators of Stakefish to access the community feel, right? If you stake with Stakefish, right, you maybe get an NFT that gives you access to our virtual worlds and experiences. Like we've been building Dogecoin world, right, and et cetera, et cetera. And right now we have an ability to attract attention. And people know where to go. It's not like some boring opportunity. You feel part of a community. Maybe you get Stakefish swag. You feel part of being part of the Stakefish tribe, or what we say, like, fish fam, right? And that's primarily why, right? If you're able to be part of a community and command attention, the delegator communications pipeline becomes much more fluid. And communications pipeline becomes much more fluid, and then we are able to effectively communicate very important things that are fundamental to the security of the network. And then hopefully that template or precedent can be set for other validators, and so that people can kind of take a look at it and say, and then maybe that will be a very good stepping stone to how proof of stake can become more secure with more involvement and engagement.
Yeah,
that's why we do stuff on
that makes sense. That makes complete sense, right? Like, so you become, so delegators will be like, hey, Stakefish is doing it, why don't you guys do something like that? Or we just go to Stakefish. Simple. So hey, listen, I just want to ask you a very quick question. Why? So this is a question for other Web3 brands, right? Like, why are you doing all these stuff on Sandbox? Why did you build a HQ and trying to do community there? And what can other people, not just delegators, but other crypto brands learn from that? That's something I want to know from you.
Yeah, it's not necessarily just Sandbox, right? There's so many metaverses like Somnium Space, Decentraland, Crypto Voxels. There's a few more, obviously, like Sandbox. I think
Decentraland.
Xverse is another one. Yeah, Decentraland. And we just chose one. Like I did some research into the different metaverses. There were
Mhm.
certain metaverses that were more open than others. Some were less
Mhm.
open, and so
So
and,
let me rephrase the question. Why should a Web3 brand look into
oh, got it.
Metaverse? Yeah.
Yeah, I think right. Stakefish obviously as a validator has very important goals in mind of being able to do the communication, right? Delegator communication, governance proposals, initiatives, like what have you, and that virtual headquarters of meeting people where they are is that means to that end. I think also right. I actually gave a presentation on this. At a metaverse and NFT conference that HonDAO, like Korea's first DAO, helped organize with Nance Classic, called Metasoul 2021, where right, if people are if like the place that there is attention commanded is in these areas, that's where you need to go, right? Crypto Twitter is an example. It used to be Reddit. All crypto stuff used to be happening on Reddit. But right, sometimes people like having followers and like socially signaling. So crypto Twitter became the place where brands and have to be present to get followers and get that communication happening. Metaverse is just like an extension of that, right? Like that's where you have to go, because that's eventually, like, if we are continuing to LARP with our variety of Ethereum addresses. Like I wrote an article called LARPing Ethereum in early April about like how, right, it doesn't have to be Ethereum, right? It can be any other blockchain. You can have multiple addresses that represent multiple identities, and then those different identities can be manifest into different like in different actions or experiences, like metaverses. And that is going to be a very core component of like how the world works. There's a fantastic example in just the traditional world. So Margaret Wenmakers is one of the Andreessen Horowitz's like partners. She used to be like Kara Swisher, like the legendary like journalist in Silicon Valley of Recode. She used to work with Kara Swisher, right? And then she ended up joining A16Z, where A16Z was already itself a prominent venture capital firm. But when Margaret Wenmakers joined A16Z, she just catapulted it into like the stage of like influence in media, and how that was kind of dogfooding their portfolio companies. And I think like that becomes, right, we've seen like existing like brands leverage, right, like social media, because that is a place where like a lot of attention is, influencers. And so I think that's just like a natural evolution of what crypto is going to, like the social media of the traditional world's brands, of like how they have to spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to do. That's just going to be metaverses for crypto, because that's just natively how we all love to operate, right? There's like anonymous avatars on Twitter, crypto Twitter, that like command a lot of respect. They obviously shit post a lot, but they command a lot of respect in terms of their thought leadership. They understand like the values of pseudo anonymity that cryptocurrency provides, in terms of like how free they are able to express certain opinions. And right, that type of LARPing, that address LARPing, that avatar LARPing is just a perfect direct connection into what metaverses are available. And if companies and brands want to be able to be in the know or hip or be where people kind of respect them, it's natural for them to exist there, and which is why we chose Sandbox.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I think I can talk about this for an hour, but I it won't it won't do justice for this conversation. But just before we move on, do you know anyone on top of your head, any crypto brand doing it extremely well, like using Twitter or social media or metaverse and going all out on their branding?
Yeah, I actually was talking to there's some companies I advise, but like they'd asked me like, oh, how do you like make it? I don't know, maybe I should like say some of these. I don't want to like give them free marketing, but it's like I think uh like, so let's say, for example, like as a fund or even like a product, like an application or product in the cryptocurrency world, uh, you can do your job very well, right? As let's say as a fund or a VC, you can be very, add a lot of value. You have the capital to back it up. You're able to support a portfolio company with like your network introductions, et cetera. And you can be basically anonymous, right? Like, or basically relatively unknown, right? You may have a very strong network and value add from your experiences as operators before you became VCs, and then right support them. But no one knows you, right? Or you don't have like that kind of name. Maybe over a long period of time. But what ends up happening, and kind of what we had seen with what Margaret Wenmakers had done with A16Z, is that right there's like these, I would say like influencers, I guess, or they themselves, like the GPs or like the venture partners themselves, are like kind of representing their brand and then using that also to their advantage. And that's essentially like, the consistency, the good takes, like the actionable insights, consistency of just constantly communicating in the public and crypto Twitter. So I think right, Sino Global Capital is like a fund that's like, I think based out of China. Like they've done like a fantastic job. I think even before like maybe they had started just traditional investing as well, but like they're always there communicating, providing a lot of great like insights, sometimes also shit posting, but like, and aside from like their core competencies of like being able to be a great fund and do that, like their brand is there because of that type of effort they put into that communication. I think another is like, right, let's use like an application on Ethereum, like Rainbow Wallet, right? Like Mike Damaris is like always there. I'm assuming like he also is doing his job, but like he's like always on Twitter, and right, sometimes he shit posts, but then he's also like providing like a lot of really great like opportunities for people to work in the space. But right, I don't think if it was for him, like I don't know if like Rainbow Wallet would have, like, it is a fantastic product on its own, but then he's definitely like catapulted it to a level where like everyone recognizes it and like he's kind of influencing it. And he himself is not necessarily just like someone they hired to be an influencer or marketer for that company, but that he's representing that as well. There's many mobile wallets. There have been many mobile wallets that have existed that have had a much more of a head start than he has, like Fortmatic and Argent. But right, obviously Rainbow Wallet is a very nice product, but it's like that, right? We're in like this, it's borrowing from like the traditional world's like social sphere of like how that is important in branding, and that branding oftentimes equates to success and just exposure. And then right, and then that is also particularly important to perhaps what we have with the metaverse as well. And then if that type of exposure and influence can basically dictate the way that huge volumes of capital flow, that is also like a direct financial impact, like what we've seen in like NFTs, right? NFT influencers, just like they will say something and then you get like millions of dollars just like immediately in like a couple of minutes. Because like the frictionless and efficiency of like what cryptocurrency and the blockchain provides. But right, that's just like the nature of the world that we live in.
It's crazy, right? Like your influence is directly can influence how much money is going, and like you can see it happening like just like that. So it's quite interesting to see. Anyway,
it's all popularity contest. Always has been, right? From when we're little kids, it's like a popularity contest. It's
but
same in the real world.
Yeah, but popularity contest mixed with money is like it's crazier, right? Like earlier it was just a social status. Now it's social status with money, right? Like so it solidifies that status or that influence. So Yeah, quite interesting. Anyway, so talking about, as we were talking about NFTs, tell us what is your opinion about NFTs? What do you like about them? What do you hate about them?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty much a fact that NFTs have become crypto's killer app, right? Killer app in the sense of maybe not. Well, actually, right. There used to be like these distinctions of like DeFi versus NFTs, right? What is the killer app in terms of total value that like locked and stuff, or total value flowing? And DeFi had a very smaller, much smaller subset of participants, even within the crypto native operating space, that had immense amounts of money flowing through them. But now it's NFTs, and there's arguably, I actually don't know the numbers, but there's a lot of money flowing in NFTs, perhaps even to rival some of DeFi, and a much broader swath of participants that are not necessarily crypto native. And it's been like such an amazing onboarding opportunity for everyone in the planet. NFTs are like, very easy to understand the concept, right? There's certain superficial aspects of NFTs that perhaps people are very easily able to latch onto, but there's more nuance to NFTs as well. It's not just a picture on the blockchain, but right, like the non-fungibility of it is its uniqueness and the utility and value that can be derived from it. But right, we've got like people like, and perhaps this is also indicative of it just needed to happen because people were just waiting on the sidelines and seeing that this revolution in crypto is happening. And now there's this opportunity for them to participate. And this is a very easy way for them to participate, right? Just like purchasing and then maybe selling or holding or displaying or using or playing games. And so that it's fantastic, right? NFTs are fantastic. I know that we at Stakefish have been, I'm an engineer in my training, right? And so like I've deployed many contracts and minted NFTs on my own. But like it's something that we are definitely aware of, and we're definitely preparing stuff on as a validator of like how NFTs can be used, especially in the main points of like delegated communications or tribe forming or family or community forming, like the fish fam. Yeah, maybe there's gonna be a Stakefish fish fam NFT that has utility. Maybe like it'll give you like discounts on commission rates over a certain period of time, or if you have it, you can unlock swag drops, or you can have access to our virtual headquarters, or maybe get insights and access to seminars or content or education or all sorts of stuff, all the sort of services. But NFTs are so valuable in that easy to understand and use, and it can unlock so many different things. On the value side of things, I guess it's I wrote a quite long article on, it was called LARPing Ethereum and deriving NFT value from interoperable utility on various metaverse applications. It's like a mouthful, but right, that was kind of like my response to like what was going on when the CryptoPunks hype was right. There was NFT value that was based on hype that eventually became like part of like the subculture of, right, kind of something that we see with like Supreme. All right, well, people will pay like, $1,000 for like a t-shirt. But there's value in that because people think that it, like as a social signaling, it's valuable. So I think there's a lot to be explored in utility. We have these fantastic, like one of my favorite NFT artists, I'm gonna shill him, is like Kevin Abosh. And he was like one of the very first to really experiment with value beyond just kind of like a picture on the blockchain. Like he did this great a project called What is Priceless, where it was basically an ERC20 token that eventually also had its influence on NFTs, where he did it with Ah Weiwei, this like Chinese, I guess maybe like a Chinese like revolutionary sort of thinker. And they were exploring like what actually value can be derived from certain things on the blockchain, right? They had literal transaction addresses that they had sent, and that signified something, and it meant something. And then also like he eventually dropped his like 1111 campaign, where it's basically like these incredible like hexadecimal like numbers, right? Like numbers have meaning to them. the hexadecimal meaning to them. There's like repetition in them. And then there was like the comment out series where it was basically like these phrases that he had indicated. And it's a variety of like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and also like what they can be used for, right? Airdrops or unlocking and token gating. A lot what we see with like collab bots on Discord for that, and access to certain things. There's like City DAO, right, which is access to like physical land and ownership through the Wisconsin DAO regulatory structure, right? There's like Congress Cash, where they actually have physical cash, right? And then they have like these fantastic silo chips for NFC reading, and like kind of like that one use generation of private key pairs, decentralized identity. It's so cool, right? I think also like in it's not just artwork, right? You also have like commodities and trading, like I don't know if we have enough time to talk about this, but like especially in the climate space, like carbon credits represent like opportunities to offset your carbon footprint. And carbon credits are by nature unique, and they can present themselves on the blockchain as NFTs. And so when they get tokenized, they go on the blockchain. And then there's also fantastic other opportunities to incentivize that. Like as a part of my role at F2 Pool, I've been leading the blockchain infrastructure carbon offset working group, where we have been discussing and investigating ways to incentivize carbon offset, rather than just having like someone pay out of pocket to purchase a carbon offset and maybe like feel good about themselves. But right, as we've seen, right, good behavior has to be incentivized, and if good behavior is purchasing carbon credits, right, that also has to be incentivized, right? You can't just continue to rely on altruism. And so we've essentially been designing like this flywheel mechanism to currently incentivize this sort of work. Yeah, NFTs is a
So
great
how do
gateway.
you incentivize it?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess for some context there, for example, like let's say like mining pools, right? Mining pools, contrary to popular belief, I think most mining pools, right? People imagine like, yeah, when a mining pool solves a block, it immediately distributes all of its rewards to its miners. But what actually ends up happening is that like miners would preferably have like a consistent source of income from these mining pools. And right, regardless of however much hash power that you have, a mining pool has on the blockchain, it is not always guaranteed to solve a block like consistently over time. Maybe over like a period of time, the proportionate amount of hash power that you control will give you the proportionate amount of blocks, but they won't always be specifically consistent, right? And so like maybe you won't get, if this phase you don't get a block, maybe you'll get two in the next phase or something, right? And so what happens there is that mining pools often end up with like large pools of reserve, like assets that they will eventually kind of start like distributing. And what often happens is like, right, those pools they have enough that they can actually, in those reserves, that they can actually deploy them into like DeFi, right? You have Curve pools, you also have DeFi like borrowing and lending platforms like Compound and Aave. And you can literally just like put those in and then generate yield, right? Collateralize it or borrow and lend it. And then now these mining pools, not only do they have the money that they get from the fees from operating, and also the block rewards and the transaction fees, they also have now an additional source of income and yield from these DeFi activities. And so now they have more money. Using that concept, right, with carbon credits, like you can essentially like package them up with assets. So let's say you have like a wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum. And that wrapped Bitcoin can also generate yield on Compound and Aave, or even in certain cases Curves on depending on those pairs. You can also generate like a green Bitcoin, right? A green wrapped Bitcoin that has been sufficient. Let's say a Bitcoin has a carbon footprint of like 2 tons, and so you have to offset it. You have to purchase 2 tons of carbon credits. You combine them and you create a green Bitcoin asset that is essentially cleaned now, provably clean because it's now green. And then you can do the same thing. You can generate yield on it. DeFi provides yield, and depending on who wants to hold it, right? Like let's say, for example, there's obviously F2 pool, right? We want to be able to indirectly say that we have hold green assets. Maybe there's like institutions like Grayscale that have a like perhaps in some cases, like a fiduciary obligation of being able to satisfy certain ESG criteria goals from their stakeholders or LPs, right? They have to have something on the balance sheets that is like, carbon neutral or carbon negative. Who knows? It is likely that in the future, governments and sovereignties will require certain companies to operate at a particular carbon neutral level. And so like there's going to be people that need to hold that and have that on their balance books. Instead of just buying carbon credits, you can have assets and get exposure to both. And then you kind of have like this flywheel where like, you have green Bitcoin. If that green Bitcoin is at a premium, then you're incentivized to arbitrage into regular Bitcoin on a trading market. And then you're wanting to do that again and again. And now you have like this, basically this funnel and the constant demand of carbon credits that you want in the system. Carbon credits in the traditional world have been notoriously inefficient. As an example, like when F2 Pool celebrated its 8th anniversary, it auctioned off a Mr. Misang piece. Like he's the #1 grossing artist on Super Rare, for example, raised $400,000, and we used that $400,000 to purchase carbon credits. And the way that we did it was we did it like ad hoc, like we did OTC, where we had to go into the traditional world. We tasked two of our working group members, Regen and Creole, and they were able to go out and purchase carbon credits for us. And it took about a week, not very quick and efficient, right? Because the nature of like how specific the amount that we needed to find, and then also the cost of what we wanted. Enter crypto, right? We have like native fractionalization, liquidity, efficient markets, and then now we're able to like have like small parts of those carbon credits. And what I mean by that is, for example, if we were looking for like 13 tons of carbon credits, we purchased 72,000+ tons, but if we need to find 13 tons of carbon credits and we went to the traditional world, sometimes the carbon credits would only say, hey, we only have 10 tons of carbon credits. And then now we're waiting for like, we need 3 other tons. But then this other guy is like, oh, we have only 5 tons of carbon credits for this project. That's not exactly 3, right? It's kind of similar to like how like the Bitcoin UTXO model works, right? So like you have to source specific portions to get the exact amount you want. Enter crypto, like you can put those non-fungible amounts into like this into NFT indexes and vaults like NFTX or NFT20 or even Seasons, for example. And then now you can have like ERC20 representations that are fungible, and then that claim redemptions. And now you can have any amount of mixing and matching that you have, right? Sometimes you're not always going to have a Bitcoin that you want to exactly have 2 tons to green. You might have 1.3768 Bitcoin, right? And you're going to have to find an exact amount. And so, right, there's fantastic people in our working group like that have created all these fascinating building blocks, like we call them carbon credit tokenization entities, right? And so it's like Creole, Offsetra, like Klima DAO. Klima DAO is like one of the only approved forks of Olympus DAO, where they have like this vault system that they provide like Klima tokens to get redemptions on carbon credits. And yeah, it's a fascinating market. I can actually send you an article later, a McKinsey report that kind of describes like the future of just in general the carbon markets themselves, because right, the world's population is not diminishing anytime soon. We're like there's constant like carbon emissions that are coming out. No matter how much we try to switch to renewable energy, right, or go all nuclear, it's going to take some time. This McKinsey report actually had stated that in the next 5 to 7 years, the carbon credit market is just going to explode 15x, and then up to like 2050 or 2040, 50, it's like 100x. Just from the nature of like the trajectory that human and mankind is going, and having efficient markets for carbon credits, and also the efficient carbon credit markets are also going to help supply more accurate demand. And so because there's going to be that type of demand that the McKinsey report suggests, then right, that will help also facilitate more capital flowing into these carbon project developers, so you can create more carbon and then carbon sequestration opportunities, right? And then you get the whole stack, right? There's so much opportunity there. Yeah. I for example, like I sponsored a hackathon with Gitcoin and Jason Bailey, who goes by Art Gnome, like a NFT thought leader, right, of green NFTs, right? Because like a lot of NFT artists or potential NFT artists were complaining, like, why would I put my art on the blockchain if the blockchain is like burning down the planet? But in actuality, right, like there's a way to address it, right? You can do the same thing exactly. Like with Bitcoin, you can get green Bitcoin. You can also have like a green NFT, right? Or green your NFT, put like a certificate on it, right? Put some metadata on it, et cetera, et cetera. When you mint it or you put it in through there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the carbon markets are fascinating. It's something that's like I think is inevitable, and I think it's an awesome opportunity to help align kind of the ethos of like cryptocurrency, where good behavior is incentivized, categorizing climate support and stewardship as good behavior, and in this case, carbon credit purchasing. And then you can solve all these problems. Solve the problem and image of crypto being dirty, right? The world is saying, oh, Bitcoin's evil because it's dirty. We solved it with these carbon credit incentivization scheme. And then we can even solve the rest of the world's problems. Because if we go negative, carbon negative, and continue to incentivize carbon credit purchasing because of cryptocurrency, then right, all other industries that have like a carbon footprint, we're taking care of their problem, right? The aerospace industry has like over 9 times more emissions than is in certain cryptocurrencies, right?
Wow, really?
And so we'll take care of their stuff. Yeah, we can be cryptocurrency can be blameless when it comes to like these types of concepts, especially from the climate side, and even be stewards and even be innovators and pioneers in paving the way for how entire industries can benefit from, right, carbon credit purchasing natively by DeFi, right? Which is great.
That's just awesome, right? Like I honestly didn't know like most of it, and I think yeah, like what you said, just to like purchase carbon credits, you had to spend a week, which just doesn't make sense. And all these liquidity pools and all these certification of like being green would also add in more money to the ecosystem, like you said, right? Like because institutions want to purchase things which are like ESG approved, and so this is just great, right? Like, so there's so much scope of new money coming in, and like it's just crazy, right? Like, so it just shows us how early we are, yet we all feel like we've missed out on so many things. It's
Yeah,
same. Yeah, it's like
the
how you
valuable
in
efficiency and liquidity. Yeah,
yes, it's like
efficiency.
how
Yeah,
it's like how you in 2012 said like oh, I missed out on Bitcoin, so I need to mine Dogecoin.
yeah. It was more of like I wanted to burn down all the banks. Don't quote me on that, but like I was very pissed off. It was like my Tyler Durden moment, at the end of Fight Club. He
yeah,
blows up all the plants with his soap. But
yeah.
I'm much less radical. Just to put
Yes,
that
yes.
on record,
Yeah,
I do
it
not
was
want
just
to
it was just
destroy all the
metaphorical.
banks. But
Yes. We
that was
won't
the.
just clip that part out as the intro.
Oh,
So, all right. So, is there anything else you want to tell the viewers about Stakefish, or something we missed? And yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we still have yet to build and do. As an example, like governance proposals, standards, and frameworks across all networks is not that standardized. And right, we need to have more efficient systems. I think there are important concepts around enforcement, decentralization, transparency, and punishing bad actors that kind of act in bad faith, that are systemic risks to the environment, the cryptocurrency ecosystem. But like those structures don't exist, so we are not able to do anything. Right? There's a lot of things. I think further decentralization and emphasis on decentralization as like an important role in the security and stability of a system is important. And also just like being able to like operate in safe manners, right? Just like we've seen so many like hackers get away with things because phishing or just like traditional screw ups by people. Just like education is kind of like we've been quite close in working with like Blockchain Acceleration Foundation, a college consortium of blockchain clubs, as well as with Blockchain Education Network, which is another global college consortium of blockchain clubs. I think there's like a lot of new roles that have existed. Like the protocol specialist role that I'm a part of, like, is a fairly new one. And we've seen a lot more people, like, it's difficult for people to find people like us who can fit into the protocol specialist role. And so like continued education of like what we do and what's important, I think is valuable. And it's just, yeah, there's a lot to build and continue to build. It's an unending, it's nice though. It's valuable, I think. So
yes, indeed it is. So how does one person join Stakefish, join your discussion? How does someone reach out to you? How does someone reach out to Stakefish or F2 Pool or anything you are doing?
Yeah, best way is, right, obviously you can contact us on our website, go to stake.fish or f2pool.com. Obviously crypto Twitter is an important presence. So like at Stakefish on Twitter for Stakefish, and then F2pool_official for F2 pool.
I'll link all these. Yes.
Yeah, and then when we set up our metaverse, right, on Sandbox, we'll be there. It's actually pretty dope. I don't know if you saw some of the teasers of like the GIFs and videos, but like the Polygonal Mind team that is developed on Sandbox is so incredible. And yeah, it's so cool.
Awesome. So thank you, Daniel, for taking your time out. It was a lovely conversation. I learned a lot, and I guess people listening to this will also learn a lot. And yeah, and thank you for doing this. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I'll stop bothering you on Twitter for canceling on me.
Yeah.